Usually when we look at a photograph of the Earth taken from space, there's this shared, almost instinctual sense of awe, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Like a universal family portrait.
Yeah, exactly. You see the globe, the swirling clouds, that endless blackness of the cosmos in the background,
Yeah.
and there's just this collective agreement.
Right. It's the blue marble.
The blue marble.
Mm.
It's like this ultimate symbol of human progress, something that totally crosses borders and languages. We got a camera up there, we look at it, we point, and we basically just say, hey, there we are.
It is, I mean, it's arguably the defining image of modern scientific triumph. For decades now, that perspective has been universally accepted as just, well, a settled fact, a fact of engineering and human evolution.
But, and this is where today's deep dive gets really intense, what if that exact same photograph isn't a triumph at all?
Right. What if it's a trap?
Exactly. What if, to a certain, subset of the population, it's literally a trap? Today, we are exploring this entirely different framework where that image is viewed as the centerpiece of an orchestrated, literal, spiritual deception.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are analyzing a narrative that frames modern space exploration not as a scientific victory, but as this massive illusion specifically designed to break the Ten Commandments.
And because we're diving into texts that completely upend modern science through a very specific, deeply controversial religious lens, we really need to establish our baseline right now.
Yes, definitely. Disclaimer time.
Right. So our sources today include excerpts from a text titled Celestial Deception, NASA versus the Ten Commandments, along with a really highly detailed video study by a guy named Bill Cave called Moses and the Moon.
Right.
And we need to be clear, these materials contain very strong, polarizing, politically and religiously charged viewpoints. I mean, they make massive allegations against established scientific institutions.
Huge allegations.
Yeah. So our goal here is strictly analytical. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, and we aren't taking sides at all. We are simply acting as your guides to help unpack the arguments, the history, and the theology these authors are using to build this specific worldview.
Right, we're just looking at what the text says. So to begin dismantling the modern worldview, the text poses a question that it seems completely straightforward at first glance. What is the greatest achievement in human history?
Which is a big question.
Right. And if you ask the average person on the street or just look up the consensus in history books, the answer is almost always the Apollo moon landing.
Oh, for sure.
Leaving our planet, walking on another celestial body. But according to the narrative laid out in these sources, celebrating Apollo is a tragic society-wide error of catastrophic proportions.
The authors draw a really hard line here. They're contrasting how modern society defines greatness with how the biblical text defines it.
Okay, so how do they define it?
Well, Bill Cave's breakdown points directly to the book of Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 4. And according to this theological framework, the absolute greatest, most unparalleled event to ever happen to humanity was not a technological feat.
Right.
It was a moral one. It was the giving of the Ten Commandments out of the fire on Mount Sinai, which was accompanied by the literal, audible voice of God.
Wow. So they argue that Mount Sinai is basically the indisputable pinnacle of human existence.
Exactly. The logic is that, planting a flag on a rock in space is ultimately meaningless compared to the establishment of universal moral law.
Right. The law is everything to them.
Yes. And the video study goes to great lengths to emphasize just how absolute this law is. They point out that it wasn't just like a list of helpful suggestions for the ancient Israelites.
It's life or death.
Far from it, yeah. To really understand the gravity of Mount Sinai in this worldview, the text cites Deuteronomy 17.
Oh, the rules for the kings, right.
Right. This chapter outlines instructions for any future king of Israel. The command was that the king must personally write out his own copy of the moral law by hand in a book, and he was required to read it every single day of his life.
Every single day.
Every day. The theological reasoning is that the law was the ultimate protective barrier. It protected the leader's mind from arrogance, ensured this continuous fear of God, and basically shielded the entire nation from corruption.
And the video actually uses a pretty grounded analogy to explain how this absolute moral law filtered down into everyday life.
Yeah, the statutes versus judgments.
Right. It distinguishes between the overarching statutes and the specific judgments. So the speaker compares a child stealing a pack of gum from a corner store to a man robbing a bank at gunpoint.
It's a really crucial distinction for their argument, because the core statute, the unbreakable law from Mount Sinai, is simply thou shalt not steal.
Sure.
But the real-world application requires nuance. The child who steals gum might just be forced to return it, apologize, and receive mercy.
Makes sense.
But the bank robber requires a much harsher penalty, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Both acts violate the statute, but they require vastly different judgments. And the authors view the Book of Deuteronomy as the ultimate flawless system for breaking down those finer points. In their eyes, it is the perfect operating system for human morality.
Okay, so if Mount Sinai is the ultimate, flawless masterpiece of reality, and the moral law is the only thing that actually matters, you have to look at how they frame the moon landing.
Right, the contrast.
Yeah, think of this like two massive blockbusters competing for the title of the ultimate reality. They basically view the Apollo missions as this malicious, unauthorized reboot of reality.
A malicious reboot. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, it's this massive, multi-billion-dollar spectacle designed with one specific goal to steal humanity's attention away from the original masterpiece.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of the conspiracy. If Mount Sinai is the truth and the moon landing is a deliberately engineered distraction, well, who orchestrated the distraction?
Right, someone had to build the reboot.
Exactly. Because according to this text, NASA didn't just, stumble into a misunderstanding of physics. The authors argue that the very roots of modern space exploration are planted deep in the occult.
And this is where the history they present gets genuinely wild.
Mm.
I mean, to build this case, the text goes back to a prophecy made in 1907 by a religious figure named Ellen White.
Yes, the text relies heavily on White's 1907 warning. She prophesied about the approach of what she called a science of the devil.
Science of the devil.
Yeah. She claimed this dark science would eventually use great, undeniable wonders to deliberately make void the law of God.
Wow.
And the authors use this 1907 prophecy as basically the starting gun for the deception because they immediately connect it to a birth that happened exactly 7 years later.
Right. In 1914, Jack Parsons was born.
Yep.
And for anyone listening who doesn't know aerospace history, Jack Parsons is widely recognized as the father of American rocketry.
He's a massive figure in aerospace.
Huge. He was a primary co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, which of course eventually became a foundational pillar of NASA.
Hmm.
But the sources focus intensely on the fact that Parsons lived this crazy double life.
Very crazy.
He wasn't just a brilliant chemist and engineer. He was a devout, practicing occultist.
And the thing is, the historical documentation on Parsons is entirely real.
Yeah, it's not made up.
No, and the authors lean into the absolute darkest aspects of it. Parsons was a dedicated follower of Aleister Crowley.
The British occultist.
Right, the notorious one who literally branded himself as the Beast and 666.
Okay.
Yeah. Parsons joined Crowley's secret organization, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. The text details his involvement in sex magic and highlights a specific, intense ritual he undertook known as the Oath of the Abyss.
I got to pause on that because the Oath of the Abyss sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, but it was a genuine ritual he actually performed.
Oh, yeah. In Crowley's system, taking the Oath of the Abyss is described as this terrifying, metaphorical, spiritual journey into total emptiness.
What does that even mean?
Basically, the practitioner attempts to strip away their entire ego, face total dissolution, and harness the raw, chaotic energies of the universe.
That is intense.
It is. And what the text emphasizes is that Parsons didn't separate his rocket science from his occultism.
Who didn't?
No, he believed they were two sides of the exact same coin. Both were methods of breaking the bonds of Earth and ascending to godhood.
Right, really?
Yeah, he famously chanted Crowley's hymn to Pan during rocket test launches out in the desert. He even began referring to himself as the Antichrist, or as 666.
That is just wow. And the sources map out this incredibly bizarre who's who of historical figures from the 1940s and 50s. Because Parsons wasn't operating in a vacuum.
Not at all.
He collaborated closely with L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who would eventually found Scientology.
Yes, that crossover is wild.
According to the narrative, Hubbard and Parsons performed these elaborate summoning rituals together in California, literally trying to manifest a goddess.
The Babylon working.
Right. And it ended with Hubbard allegedly stealing a massive amount of Parsons' money and just fleeing on a boat.
You really can't make this stuff up. And the authors use this connection to point out that early rocketry, black magic, and science fiction were all incubating in the exact same room.
At the exact same time.
Exactly. They even point to the advanced esoteric theology of Scientology, which involves, ancient intergalactic wars and alien spirits, as further proof that the entire milieu surrounding early space exploration was fundamentally spiritual, not scientific.
And they just keep stacking the deck with these associations.
Yeah.
They bring in Wernher von Braun, the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that took Apollo to the moon.
Right.
Von Braun was, factually, a former Nazi scientist brought to the United States through Operation Paperclip.
Yep.
And then, almost jarringly, they implicate Walt Disney.
Which seems weird at first, but Disney's inclusion is vital to their argument about mass deception.
How so?
Well, in the 1950s, Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney actually collaborated on a series of mainstream television specials all about space exploration.
Oh, to get the public excited about it?
Right. And the authors characterized Disney as an alleged occultist himself, arguing that his entire media empire was utilized to condition the American public.
Condition them for what?
The theory is that before you can fake a moon landing, you have to convince the public that space travel is conceptually possible in the first place. And Disney provided that psychological conditioning through television and theme parks.
Wow. They basically summarize this entire historical web by claiming the deception is hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight, yeah.
They point out that there is literally a crater on the dark side of the moon that the International Astronomical Union named the Parsons crater.
After Jack Parsons.
Yes. And the speaker in the video asks this deeply rhetorical question. How do you name a crater on the dark side of the moon after a literal Satanist when, according to this worldview, no human being has ever actually been there?
Right, it's like a mocking signature to them.
Exactly. They even quote the Red Hot Chili Peppers song Californication, the lyric that goes, "Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement."
Oh, yeah.
They view that as pop culture openly confessing to the lie.
The whole Hollywood basement concept is totally central to their belief that all space media is fabricated. But I imagine this raises a pretty significant logical hurdle for anyone familiar with basic physics.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
Let's really pull this apart because I'm struggling with the leap in logic here.
Okay, let's hear it.
I completely understand the historical argument that Jack Parsons was a highly eccentric, deeply controversial occultist who practiced black magic. But how do the authors bridge the gap between the engineer's personal life and the physics of the machine?
Right, how does one taint the other?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Liquid oxygen and kerosene combusting isn't a theological event. It's just chemistry. Does the personal belief system of the engineer automatically make the math itself evil?
So, to answer that, you have to completely step outside of the secular scientific method.
Okay.
The authors rely entirely on theological reasoning to bridge that exact gap. The video study extensively quotes the biblical book of James, specifically chapter 3, which asks this fundamental metaphorical question, can a fountain yield both salt water and fresh water from the same opening?
Meaning a corrupted source can't produce something pure.
Exactly. The theological premise is that all true science and all true knowledge can only originate from God and the biblical text.
Right.
Therefore, an institution like JPL or NASA, which was founded by individuals deeply embedded in the occult, Nazism, and black magic, it's classified as a bitter fountain.
A bitter fountain.
Yeah. According to this worldview, it is a spiritual impossibility for an institution rooted in that much darkness to produce the fresh water of true, objective science.
So it's like finding out the architect who designed a beautiful, soaring cathedral was secretly performing dark rituals in the basement, and then being told that the very bricks of the building are now unholy to touch.
That's a great analogy.
The text is demanding that you throw out the entire building. They are concluding that this bitter fountain can only produce false science, or what they explicitly label as fake space.
Which brings up an even more profound question of cognitive dissonance.
How so?
Because even if you accept the whole bitter fountain theology, a devout believer still lives in a world where they can walk outside, look up, and see a rocket launch from Cape Canaveral.
Right. I mean, you can see it with your own eyes.
They can track a satellite dish. So how does the text convince a reader to disregard their own physical eyes?
That is the ultimate hurdle. If you're going to claim space is fake, you have to explain where the rockets are actually going.
And this is where the text introduces ancient Hebrew cosmology. To disregard the physical rockets, the authors argue that the modern model of an infinite expanding vacuum of space is just a complete lie.
Okay.
They point to the literal biblical account of creation, specifically the concept of the firmament.
Right. We really need to explain how the firmament functions mechanically in this worldview, because it changes everything about how they view a rocket launch.
Yeah, it completely changes the physics. In this cosmological model, the Earth is not a spinning globe in an infinite vacuum.
Not a globe.
No, it is enclosed by a solid dome, the firmament. And above this solid dome, there is literal physical water. The biblical text refers to this as the waters above.
So it's basically a terrarium.
Essentially, yes. So when a modern believer in this framework sees a rocket launch into the sky, they aren't seeing a vessel heading into the vacuum of space.
Because space isn't there.
Right. Mechanically, they believe space does not exist. A rocket cannot go to the moon because it would eventually just hit a solid dome of water. Therefore, whatever NASA is showing on television must, by definition, be fabricated.
Oh, wow. So the theology actively overwrites the physics.
Completely overwrites it.
Because the physical model of the universe is a closed, domed system, the very concept of a lunar landing is physically impossible. That means every image, every broadcast, every single moon rock is just part of the Hollywood basement illusion.
And this isn't just about calling NASA liars, it's about identifying what NASA represents spiritually.
The idolatry part.
Yes. The sources circle back to the book of Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 4, which contains explicit ancient warnings to the Israelites. The text warns them against lifting their eyes to heaven and being driven to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Oh, I see. So the authors take that ancient warning about astrology and apply it directly to modern space exploration.
Exactly.
They argue that when society gathers around a television to watch a rover land on Mars, or when we marvel at the naming of a moon crater, we aren't celebrating science.
We are committing mass spiritual idolatry.
Wow, they literally equate believing in the moon landing to worshiping the ancient false god Baal.
Yes, Baal.
NASA, in this view, is simply the modern high priesthood of sun and moon worship.
To emphasize the sheer gravity of this situation, the text draws a parallel to one of the most dramatic confrontations in the biblical narrative, the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel.
Oh, the big showdown.
Right. Elijah stands before a completely divided nation and demands they make an absolute choice. He asks them, "How long halt ye between two opinions?"
You have to choose.
You cannot serve two masters. You must choose to serve the God of Israel, or you must serve the false god Baal. There is no middle ground.
For you listening right now, just imagine the weight of being handed this ultimate spiritual ultimatum. You weren't just deciding what you think about historical footage from 1969.
Right, it's not just a historical debate.
No. You are being told that accepting the moon landing as reality is an active state of rebellion against the Creator. It's a stunning example of how adopting a specific theological framework completely rewrites what the rest of the world considers to be just, indisputable basic facts.
And the authors make it clear that there is absolutely no room for compromise. None. For a devout believer navigating this narrative, there is no reconciling faith with modern astrophysics. You cannot believe that God created a firmament with waters above and simultaneously believe that Wernher von Braun shot a man through it. The two concepts are mutually exclusive.
The text even ties this into eschatology, right? The end of the world. They bring up the three angels' messages from Revelation chapter 14.
They do.
Let's break down how that prophecy operates within this whole anti-space narrative.
Okay, so the three angels' messages are viewed by many traditional theologies as the final, urgent warnings to humanity before the end of history.
The final warning.
Right. The first angel's message is a direct call to worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. It is a call to recognize the literal biblical creator.
Okay.
Then the second angel's message declares that Babylon is fallen. Babylon represents this massive global system of spiritual confusion, false doctrine, and rebellion.
So by framing NASA's model of the universe as a lie rooted in the occult, the authors are categorizing the entire concept of space as the doctrine of Babylon.
Precisely. To embrace the infinite vacuum of space, the Big Bang or the Apollo missions, is to embrace the confusion of Babylon.
Wow.
It is to fail the ultimate test of faith. The believers instructed that their salvation requires them to stand firm on the reality of Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments, and to entirely reject the science of the devil.
Even if everyone else thinks they're crazy.
Even if it means standing completely alone, isolated against the consensus of the entire modern scientific world.
That is just an incredibly heavy psychological burden to carry.
Very heavy.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of conceptual and historical ground today. Let's trace the arc of the arguments we just unpacked.
Good idea.
We started with the intense theological battle for the title of humanity's greatest achievement, contrasting the moral permanence of the fire on Mount Sinai with the technological spectacle of the Apollo missions.
From there, we explored the causality of the deception. We dug into the genuinely bizarre but documented occult history of JPL's Jack Parsons.
Right.
We looked at his connections to Aleister Crowley's OTO, the Oath of the Abyss, and that strange convergence of rocketry, L. Ron Hubbard, Operation Paperclip scientists, and Disney's mass media conditioning.
And we saw how the authors use that specific history, combined with the biblical metaphor of the bitter fountain in James 3, to construct the argument that rocket science is inherently corrupt, that it cannot produce true science.
Exactly.
Which led us to the cosmological roadblock, the firmament and the waters above, explaining how a believer mechanically dismisses the physical reality of a rocket launch.
Finally, we arrived at the stark religious ultimatum of Mount Carmel. The demand that devout believers completely reject modern space science as a satanic illusion, categorizing NASA as modern Babylon, designed solely to distract humanity from the absolute authority of the Ten Commandments.
Looking at all of this, you really have to ask, why does understanding this specific, highly niche narrative matter to someone who might completely 100% reject it?
It matters deeply because exploring this narrative offers an incredible look at the mechanics of belief and cognitive dissonance.
How we process information.
Yeah. It shows us exactly how individuals can synthesize ancient scripture, historical anomalies, and modern technology to construct a completely insulated, comprehensive counter-narrative to mainstream society.
Right.
It proves that facts don't exist in a vacuum. They only have meaning based on the framework you place them in. It's a masterclass in how different lenses can radically alter the perception of the exact same physical reality.
It forces you to realize that what looks like undeniable proof to one person looks like a carefully constructed prison to another.
Absolutely.
And it leaves us with a final, incredibly provocative philosophical thought to ponder.
What's that?
Well, if you look at the broad arc of human progress, many of our greatest technological leaps in medicine, in computing, in aviation, were pioneered by people with incredibly dark, complex, or deeply controversial private lives.
Right. It raises the question of whether the origin of a technology permanently taints the technology itself.
Exactly. Can a bitter fountain produce fresh water? If a rocket successfully gets a payload into orbit, does it actually matter if the person who engineered the solid fuel believed he was performing black magic in his basement?
That is the ultimate question of separating the art from the artist.
But applied to the rigid mathematical laws of physics and engineering.
It really challenges us to consider where science ends and the ideology of the scientist begins.
So the next time you see a photograph of the Earth taken from the vastness of space, that beautiful, unifying, universal blue marble, just remember the mechanics of belief.
It's all about the lens.
Depending entirely on the map of reality you happen to be holding, you might be looking at humanity's greatest, most inspiring triumph. Or you might be staring directly at the greatest illusion ever built. Keep questioning the lens you look through. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.